I guess it'll take more than a kiss to heal damage from the diamonds.
I should be able to do this.
It's all right, Stephen. Remember, she's not cracked. She's corrupted. And that's something different.
It's sort of like if MC Bear Bear didn't tear the fabric of his arm, but the fabric of his mind.
So, as the title suggests, this video is going to be covering the Steven Universe future corruption fan theory that seems to be the next Rose is Pink Diamond theory in terms of how divisive the fandom is on it. Some people believe wholeheartedly that this theory has all but been confirmed, and others believe that it's beyond the realm of possibility. Personally, I'm more within the camp that this theory holds more ground than it has holes in it, but today my job is to present to you the evidence that proves our dear friend Wormy Boy is in fact Steven Universe himself. It's important to mention that I know I'm not the first one who has made a video on this theory, and I'm probably also not the first to bring up some of these talking points. However, I wanted to present my take on this theory now that we're reaching the finale. First, we're going to start off by talking about corruption in general. What is it? How does it happen? And can it be self-inflicted? I'm sure most of you need no introduction to the concept of corruption, but it is a central part of this theory and needs to be understood in order for me to prove my point. So, first and foremost, corruption is mental damage received from trauma that manifests as physical damage. Gems who are afflicted by corruption lose their sapience and revert to a feral state. Their physical forms lose their humanoid look and become animal-like. It's important to note that this damage is separate from that of cracking or shattering a gem, which are two different forms of gem injuries that cause different symptoms. While cracking and shattering also affects a gem's physical form, it seems as though their mental state stays mostly intact. Back when Amethyst cracked her gem in an indirect kiss, her form glitched and prevented her from functioning properly. However, as we can see, she's still clearly sapient and there mentally. The cracking of her gem seemed to only be reflected in her physical form rather than mental. The same thing can be seen in the episode Bubbled, where Eyeball's gem is cracked. While she glitches out, it's clear that she's fully aware of her surroundings as well as the situation. Even like the gems that compose the cluster, they maintain some level of singular sapience. Sure, they eventually learn to work together as one singular being, but each gem shard is still somewhat aware of their individual situation. This can be seen in the episode Gem Drill, where Steven talks individually to some gem shards. Of course, because they're shattered, there's some limitations to what they can think, but they haven't lost their self-awareness for the most part. With corruption, this isn't at all the case. While their physical forms reflect that they've been corrupted, it isn't their bodies that are malfunctioning. In this case, it is very much so their minds. Their bodies, while no longer humanoid, are not glitching or rapidly changing forms. They're solidly projected, and corrupted gems themselves are even considered to be dangerous and fully capable of defending themselves. So in this case, it's the mind that's malfunctioning instead of the body. And this distinction is important, though right now is seemingly unrelated. We'll get to that in a moment, but I have some other things to cover first. Now, as of current, there's only two confirmed ways that you can become corrupted. If you were hit with the light from the damage of the diamonds back during the Gem War, or if you were fused with an already corrupted gem. It's implied that corruption functions like a virus, overtaking and corrupting the files of a gem's mind. This is what causes them to stop working properly, and is why Garnet refers to it as a tear in the mind. This is why it would make sense that the damage of the diamonds affected all gems that it touched, but failed to afflict Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, Rose, and Bismuth. It failed to affect Garnet, Pearl, and Rose because of Rose's shield. It failed to affect Amethyst because she was being protected by the ground that she was being incubated in. And it failed to affect Bismuth because she was poofed and protected by her bubble. They didn't come into contact with the virus, and so they managed to avoid becoming infected. And going off of this same logic, this is why Jasper was able to contract and become corrupted herself. She fused with a corrupted gem, allowing her own gemstone to become susceptible to the virus. When you become a fusion, you're no longer individuals. Your fusion becomes one person, a representation of your relationship with whomever you're fused with. Because they momentarily shared each other's thoughts and feelings, Jasper was exposed to the memory they had of corruption, and therefore was exposed to that same light and sound that the gem who she was fusing with had experienced thousands of years ago. That memory couldn't be unseen and was therefore passed along to Jasper, who ended up being corrupted as well. In her anger, Jasper self-inflicted trauma upon herself that ended with her becoming corrupted. Had she not been so angry and let her rage consume her, she never would have become corrupted. Anger which should be giving you deja vu at this point. Now, while these are the known ways a gem can become corrupted, that's not to say that there aren't other ways that we just haven't seen yet. Even if we wanted to follow strictly by canon rules and say that a diamond needed to cause it, we already have some evidence that there is more than just those two ways to become a corrupt gem. In the Steven Universe Future episode Volleyball, it's revealed that the crack on Pink Pearl, or Volleyball's face, was caused by Pink Diamond. While this clearly wasn't a calculated attack from Pink Diamond towards her Pearl like the damage of the diamonds was, it still has a similar effect. Pink Diamond threw a temper tantrum and accidentally screamed and hurt Volleyball, traumatizing her. While at the Pearl Repair Center, the AI in charge of repairing the damaged pearls even remarks that Volleyball's gemstone is physically fine, it's her psyche that's damaged and is manifesting in a physical injury. While Volleyball still maintains her humanoid form, there is still a physical abnormality on her face. This abnormality doesn't inhibit how she functions, and she still doesn't glitch or malfunction like cracked gems do. Her damage is confirmed to be psychological, hinting at it being more akin to corruption. Like corruption, mental illness is a sickness. Her trauma from being hurt by somebody who she was close with is manifesting as a physical ailment, but isn't inhibiting her gem's physical function like a crack or being shattered would. This implies that what Pink Pearl is suffering from is a form of corruption, though it isn't as outwardly obvious as the other gems who are suffering from it. You also need to keep in mind that the damage of the diamonds was caused by 3 diamonds and not just 1, which is why from a lore aspect, putting all symbolism aside, her injuries may not seem overtly similar. Or we could also infer that the type of trauma that they have could manifest in different ways. Pink Pearl has a crack on her face, making it look like she was hit because her trauma was related to her being hurt by someone who she cared about. Gems corrupted in the Gem War may have turned into monsters because their trauma was related to Earth, organic life, and war, hence their monstrous forms that can fight and easily intimidate. Corruption can just be a name put to trauma or psychological damage and isn't just one defining instance that always looks the same. This could explain the difference between Volleyball and an Earth-corrupted gem. Now, this raises the question, Steven is a diamond, so is he susceptible to corruption and could he corrupt himself? Yes and no. Yes, in that the diamonds aren't immune to becoming corrupted, and no, in that he's causing it to himself. You need to keep in mind that Steven had a very traumatic childhood. From a very young age, he was thrust into an ongoing war that was the consequence of his mother's actions. He was forced to deal with problems that someone his age shouldn't have to deal with, and found out things about his family members that were emotionally scarring. And on top of all of that, he was constantly compared to his mother by people who he cared about and felt like he could never measure up to her. He watched Jasper become corrupted through someone who tried to murder him into the vacuum of space, was put on trial for his mother's war crimes, and then had his gem torn from his stomach and was left for dead. This kid has been through a lot and was dealing with it pretty well up until recently. Now that things have calmed down and he's run out of people to help, he's being forced to look back on and reflect on his own trauma. Trauma which he had pushed to the back of his mind and tried to forget because thinking about it causes him immense emotional distress. He's managed to ignore it up until this point, but it's catching up with him and manifesting as the unwanted appearance of Pink Steven. We know that Steven's powers are controlled by his emotional state and stability, and so were Pink Diamond's. If he is unable to control his powers, that comes from a place of him being mentally unstable. And that much is clear through the appearance of Pink Steven, who only appears when he's emotionally distraught. Through the episode Volleyball, we learned that this came from a place of anger and caused things like destructive screams. We see this exact same thing happening now with Steven. We also know that the physical scars can become worse depending on how the afflicted is dealing with the trauma. We see this in 2 instances. One with Volleyball when she's confronted about her injury, and the second time with Jasper's corruption scene. While it may be possible that Jasper fully corrupted because she was already in the process of doing so, it could have also been that she caused it to progress faster because of how worked up she was getting over Pink Diamond while reprimanding Steven. This also begs the question if a gem can re-corrupt itself if they have a relapse and stop coping in a healthy way. If corruption can worsen or quicken based on the way the afflicted is coping with it, then we have our answer on what causes Steven to corrupt. He very obviously is having a difficult time with his trauma, and I don't think that it's too far-fetched to say that if he loses control of his powers due to unstable emotions, that it can lead into corruption. This is why the introduction of Jasper in the first episode was so important and served as an unspoken cautionary tale as well as foreshadowing. While Jasper was corrupted because she fused with a corrupted gem, it was her anger that got her to that point. Her trauma of going through war and having lost a leader she admired. Her trauma of being trapped at the bottom of the ocean as a toxic fusion and then being beaten multiple times by a fusion. All of this got to be too much for her, and she became angry and stopped coping in a healthy way. So while yes, she was corrupted as a result of fusing, she was also corrupted as a result of her anger and impulse to act on that decision. Her inclusion in this epilogue series and her inclusion in Steven's story perhaps hint at the road that he is currently headed down, a road of impulsive and self-destructive decisions that are taken when the trauma becomes too much to handle. The reason Jasper has something to teach Steven is because she's been down this road, where she couldn't deal with the events from her past, and that ended in angry outbursts that became self-destructive in the end. It would be logical to assume that if this were the case, if Steven were to corrupt himself from being unable to control his emotions, he could also uncorrupt himself by calming down and facing his trauma. And it isn't just thematically that this theory makes sense, it does from a lore perspective as well. People often forget that Steven is a diamond, so even if corruption were to only be given from a diamond, it's still possible even with this context. Now, of course, beyond this thematic analysis, there are other little hints and bits of foreshadowing sprinkled throughout the show, just like there was with the rose pink diamond reveal. The first and most obvious is the show's consistent mention of Sneeple. Now, as it has been speculated upon in multiple instances, Sneeple could be the creators of the diamonds or another race of aliens entirely. And while this could be true, it seems to imply that Sneeple was actually referring to what Steven's corrupted form looked like. He's a human gem hybrid, which is where the snake person or Snursen term comes from. The human half being, well, the human half, and the gem half being referred to as the snake half. So yes, Sneeple are technically an entire different race of alien because the only Snursen who exists is a hybrid. He isn't a gem, and he isn't a human. This isn't the only hint that we've gotten in terms of the giant worm in the intro being Steven's monstrous form. There were also a few visual cues that we were given as well, one of the first being in the episode Keep Beach City Weird. Steven dresses up as a Snursen to cheer up Ronaldo and is then kidnapped for observation. The gems later jump in and save him, exclaiming that they want Ronaldo to give them back their Steven. This could be foreshadowing to how the gems feel like they don't know Steven anymore, as expressed in the episode Snow Day. Steven is becoming a person they no longer recognize, and they could express that concern to him in a future episode. In lesser instances of possible foreshadowing, Steven can be seen in a caterpillar sleeping bag in the episode Same Old World, and in an indirect kiss, Pearl mentions how he was crying about how snakes have no arms. There's also the imagery on a dollar bill that has a diamond and a snake on it. For a series that has yet to show an actual Snursen, there sure is a lot of snake-related imagery and references. There's also the episode Gemcation, where Pearl is attacked by a snake called Party Guy while they're on vacation. This could perhaps be hinting at the incoming fight that the gems will have to have when they're fighting Steven. There is also the fact that if you look at the unknown worm-like creature in Future's introduction, they and Steven both have similar facial structures. Their noses are identical, and you can see a much more rigid-looking Steven facial structure. In addition to that, it looks as though the worm is pink and their spikes look like Rose's thorns. Perhaps symbolic of the fact that a lot of Rose's problems and insecurities were passed down to her son and have now caused him to develop his own host of problems that make him push others away and hurt them if they get too close. Whether or not the scenes of the past hint at the scenes of the future is up for debate, but one thing is certain. Steven's past is catching up with him, and one way or another, he is going to need to confront it. So whether you believe Steven is going to end up corrupting, or whether you believe it isn't him and he's just going to straight up die in the end, let's just all agree on one thing. Steven needs therapy. And with all that said, I'm going to end off today's video. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, why not subscribe and hit the bell icon to see when I upload. Special thank you to my top tier patrons, Ambrose Rothwood, Brandon Nunes, Lee Taylor, and Zachary Ansley. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have a great day, everyone.